Hello, welcome to Prajim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 61 of C# video series. In this session, we'll discuss about what are partial classes, the advantages of using partial classes, and the places where we use partial classes today. Partial classes allow us to split a class into two or more physical files. All these physical parts are then combined into a single class when the application is compiled. The partial keyword can also be used to split a structure or an interface over two or more physical files. Let's understand these partial classes with an example. Let's flip to Visual Studio. Here I have a very simple ASP.NET Web application project. Let's add a simple class file to this project. Right click on the project, add new item, and let's add a class file, and let's call this customer.cs. I want to create a very simple customer class, and this customer class is going to have two private properties. So private string underscore first name, and another private property, private string underscore last name. Okay, to expose these two private fields, I'm going to have two public properties. So public string first name get return underscore first name and set underscore first name is equal to value. And similarly, if I want to generate the property for the last name, I can simply right click on that, refactor encapsulate field, click OK. That should generate the property for us automatically. So if you look at this class so far, we have two very simple private fields, and to expose those private fields we have two public properties. Let's also have a simple public method which returns the full name of the customer. So public string, let's call this get full name, and all this method is going to do is concatenate the first name and last name together. So return underscore first name, to that concatenate a comma with a space and then last name. Okay, so it's a very simple class with two private fields, two public properties, and one public method. And this is how we have been creating classes all this while. Okay, but then if you look at this class is present in a single physical file, that's customer.cs. Now, is it possible to split this class into two or more physical files? Absolutely, we can do that, and that's what is the partial keyword used for. Okay, so let's actually split this class into two or more physical files. Actually, we'll split this into two files in this example. So let's add a class file, and I'm going to call this partial customer 1. I'm going to name this as so, and click add. So that adds that file partial customer 1, but then I want to call this class as partial customer class. And along the same lines, let's add another file to this project. So add new class, and I'm going to call this partial customer 2.cs. Okay, click add. So that should add that file, and I'm going to call this public class partial customer. Now if you look at this one, this class doesn't have the partial keyword. Now the first thing, the idea is basically we want to split this customer class into two physical files. So if that's your intention, we have to use the partial keyword. So the first thing that I have to do here is I'm going to use the partial keyword. So public partial class partial customer. So this class is a partial customer class. How do I know that? Because I'm using the partial keyword. Okay, so I'm going to use this even in partial customer 2.cs file. So in both the places we said this is a partial class using this partial keyword. Now in this first piece, in partial customer 1.cs, I'm going to have just the private fields and the two public properties. So let's copy them together and paste them here. So if you look at this part of the partial class is containing my private fields and my public properties, and partial customer 2, that is this physical file, which contains the rest of the partial customer class, is going to contain getFullName, the public method that we have. So let me copy and paste that here. Now look at this. This underscore first name and underscore last name, are these fields defined anywhere within this file? No, but then I'm able to use those fields here. And look at this, when I try to compile this project by right clicking and build, look at this, build succeeded. So where are these fields coming from? The fact that we have marked this class with the partial keyword, the C# compiler knows that, okay, this is only a part of the class. These fields should be, maybe they could be present in the other part. And that's true. If you look at partial customer1.cs file, though they are private fields, as they belong to the same class, the other partial class is able to access them. So when we actually compile this solution, what's going to happen, these two physical files are now combined into one class called partial customer class. The key thing to remember here is that you have to use that partial keyword, specifying your intention that you want to physically divide this class into two or more files. And that's what we have done here. Okay, and to use this class, we use it exactly the same way as we do with the customer class. For example, let's say I want to create an instance of this customer class and then use that. So let's go to the code behind file of the web form. So let's say on the page load, this customer class, if you look at this, it's not a partial class, it's a regular class. Okay, so if you want to create an instance of that class, all we do is customer c1 is equal to new customer. So c1 dot first name, let's say that is equal to Prajim, and maybe c1 dot last name is equal to technologies. And then if I want to print out the full name, or if I want to retrieve the full name, let's say string full name, and let's call this full name 1 is equal to c1 dot get full name method, and then probably print that out onto the response stream. So response dot write, we can say full name is equal to c1 dot get full name. Okay, now I can do the same thing with our partial class as well. If you look at this partial customer class, this is spread across these two files, but then when after we compile them, it will be formed as one class. So now look at that, I'm going to create an instance of this partial customer exactly the same way as I have done this customer class. Look at this, I'm able to extract the first name property as usual. Let's call this Prajim. And similarly, I'm able to access the last name. Maybe in this case, we'll call it tech. And look at that, c2 dot get full name. I'm able to access that method as well, though it's defined in a different physical file. Let's call the string full name 2. And if I want to write this out, we can just say response dot write c2 dot instead of using that, we can use the full name 2 variable. The same is the case here because we have already retrieved the full name into this variable. And then just to have the output in separate lines, let's put an HTML break there, and let's do the same thing here. Okay, so now if we run this, as you might expect, the output will be the exact same thing, So full name is equal to Prajim Technologies and Prajim Tech, because we haven't specified that string here, full name. Okay, so partial classes basically allow us to split a class into two or more physical files, and that's what we have exactly seen. So what are the advantages of using these partial classes? The main advantage that of using partial classes is that Visual Studio today uses these partial classes to separate automatically generated system code from the developer's code. Let's understand what we mean by that. For example, when we added this web form, look at this. this web form has two code files. One is called webform1.aspx.cs. This is the code behind file where we actually write our code, the custom code that we write for this page. But then there is another page, webform1.aspx.designer.cs. What is this file? This file is going to contain the system generated code. What do we mean by that? For example, let's flip to the web form. If I drag and drop a text box control onto this web form, okay, so I have this text box control, and if I flip to the source, the ID of the text box is text box 1. So where is this ID stored? Okay, if I go to the code behind file, and if I say textbox1.text, look at that, I'm able to retrieve that object. So where is the declaration for this object present? If you look at the code behind itself, you don't have the declaration for that text box anywhere. So where is that present? That is present in the designer file. So textbox1 here, we are able to use that there. Okay, so when we added the text box control onto the web form, Visual Studio, has actually generated the code for the declaration of the text box and put that in the designer file. So this designer file is used to store all the system generated code, whereas this webform1.aspx.cs code behind file is used for the developer's custom code. So we have a clean separation from the system generated code and the developer's code. So that's how the partial classes are actually used today. Okay, but Microsoft also claims that if you're working on a large project, spreading a class over separate files allow multiple programmers to work on it simultaneously. For example, we have split the customer class into two files, partial customer 1 and partial customer 2. Maybe one developer can work on this file, partial customer 2 file, implementing all the methods of this class, and the other developer can work on the private fields and public properties that this class exposes. So dividing a class into multiple files here is actually allowing two or more developers to work on that class. Okay, but in reality I haven't seen anybody using partial classes just to work on them simultaneously. Not only ASP.NET Web applications, even the Windows Forms applications use this technique to separate the system generated code from the developer's code. For example, let's add a Windows application to the solution. So on the solution, right click, add, and select new project. I'm going to select Windows Forms application here, click OK. That's going to add the Windows application, and if you look at this, I have a form here, and then onto this form, if I drag and drop a text box control, so I have a text box control here, and then if I go to the forms code file, look at that, again I'm able to access the textbox1.text property. So there should be a declaration for this text box somewhere. Okay, but then if you look at this file itself, the code file here, it doesn't have the declaration for the text box anywhere. So where is this present? Again, this form has a designer file, form1.designer.cs, and if we scroll down, you see a declaration for that text box control there. Okay, so these web applications and Windows applications, to separate the system generated code from the developer's code, we use these partial classes. In the next session, we'll talk about the rules to keep in mind when creating partial classes. One of the very important rules to keep in mind is that when we create these partial classes, it's very important that you use the partial keyword. Otherwise, the system will not know your intention of dividing that class into two. For example, we have two partial classes here, partial customer 1.cs, partial customer 2.cs. For example, if I remove the partial keyword from this, then it's like a regular class. Now there is already a class with partial keyword, and you're creating another class, partial customer, here. And if I try to compile this, as you might expect, we get a compiler error stating missing partial modifier on declaration of type AudioDemo.partialCustomer. So on this class, you're missing the partial keyword because there is another partial declaration of this type. Where? In partial customer1.cs file. Okay, so there are several rules that these partial classes should follow. We'll talk about them in the next session. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET C#, and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.